All right. Well, thanks again, everyone, for checking out my channel. I'm Megan, and my guest today is Amy. So, Amy, thanks so much for willing to share your story. Could you start out by just sharing a little bit about yourself and your faith background?
Sure. Thank you for having me today. I grew up in Pennsylvania in a family that was generations of Methodists. And so certainly a faith-based Christian home, but not a Catholic for as far back as I'm aware.
Awesome. Very cool. Was your family like pretty serious about the faith, or more like kind of more like nominal, cultural, or?
No, they're serious about it. My parents were and remain very faithful to their church, their Methodist church that they've gone to forever. And my siblings and I, when we became teenagers, we went through what I think a lot of families that are trying to raise kids well, they really engage the kids in the youth group.
Hmm.
And that was our experience. And really, when we started getting serious about our faith as kids, that even encouraged my parents to kind of deepen their faith to try to, be able to be leaders in that way to us. So, I mean, we were at church every Sunday. We were at youth group every Wednesday. We were at different things throughout the week that would pop up here and there. So we were very involved and engaged all the way through high school.
That's awesome. That's really great to hear that like it was, a serious faith. That's awesome. So then when did you become interested or maybe aware or exposed to Catholicism?
Yeah. So, when I graduated high school, I was pretty young. I was a, late spring birthday. So I was always one of those kids that was younger in my class. And so my parents at the time, we were attending a church where the pastor and his wife had both attended Oral Roberts University. And their daughter, who was a year older than me, was attending ORU as well. And so being that I was young, my parents didn't really want to just sort of send me off into, college visit land. And so they said, well, if you want to go do a college visit, you can go visit your friend who's at ORU. So I did. And it was really the first time I'd ever spent a weekend on a college campus. And so, of course, I was sort of immediately interested. And so I didn't even apply anywhere else for college. I just decided I was going there. My best friend at the time was also going to go there. And so we went together and roomed together our first year. And so my husband, I met my husband there at ORU. And for those who are not very aware of Oral Roberts University, it is not at all a Catholic environment. It's
Okay.
a very, it's very much of the sort of prosperity gospel, charismatic evangelical ilk. So it's not Catholic at all. We knew one kid while we were there who was Catholic, and he had converted to Catholicism while he was a student. So apologize for my dog.
Oh, no worries.
So
my cat may make an appearance here at some point.
Yeah, so he was a convert while he was there. So as far as we knew, Catholicism was like, we looked at them like zoo animals, like, oh, those people who believe something out there. And so, but of course we thought, we were the true church, if you will. So really my interest came about, toward the end of college. I was getting kind of, disenchanted, you might say, with the evangelical church, but I didn't know a whole lot of where to look. It was sort of one of those, but where would I go kind of environment. So I remember shortly after college, I visited some Anglican parishes and I went to some Lutheran churches. I was just kind of looking around. And then very shortly after I graduated from college, I started working for an organization in Haiti. And so I was not living there full time, but I was spending a lot of time in Haiti.
That's super cool.
And it was a fabulous experience. And the women who ran the organization that I worked with were certainly God-fearing women who wanted to serve. And this was an orphan care facility. So, we had at the time like 75 children living there.
Wow.
And it was a beautiful experience, but there were some real problems that I was identifying that to me felt like they were not problems with this specific organization, but they were problems with the ideology underpinning the organization. Yeah. So I was uncomfortable, but I didn't really know where to go or what to do. And in the town that I was spending a lot of time in Haiti, there were a group of French Canadian nuns. We did not share a language. They were obviously French speaking, and in Haiti, the native language is Creole, which is a sort of version of French. And so they were able to communicate with the local people in Creole. I spoke English and a bit of Spanish, and we were right on the border, so I could communicate with the Dominican Republic the friends of ours and across the border in the Dominican Republic in Spanish, but I didn't speak any French. So these nuns and it was truly an experience of just watching them. We never had a conversation. And frankly, I doubt they ever even knew I was watching them because it's not like we passed each other in the street every day. I was sort of from a distance seeing there's this other organization and they're serving the population here as well, but they're doing it very differently. And so that's where it all started, was just watching these nuns. And then I was catechized by Google at first, just looking things up online, like, what do Catholics believe about X? And I came across some social doctrine that I read, and that was a really big thing for me. And my husband was also going through sort of a similar experience, but his conversion was much more based in church history and reading the early church fathers. It was a much more academic approach.
Gotcha.
So that's a very long answer to how did I become interested in Catholicism.
Yeah, no, I have a couple of questions there. I guess I want to ask you how your husband fits in there, if you guys met there or how that fits in. But I'm also curious what it was about the nuns that you kind of observed that really spoke to you.
Yeah. Well, with my husband, so we knew each other in college. And I graduated a year before he did. And so I was off in Haiti and he was finishing up college. And we knew each other. And so we were having these conversations with each other about this interest, this sort of common interest that we had in Catholicism. But at the time, I don't even think we were dating yet. We were just kind of, in that stage where you're talking a lot, but you're not dating. And so he was coming in as blind as I was. Now he had the advantage of his final year of college is when he really became interested in Catholicism. And so he had the opportunity to do more studying, which was, important to his conversion, where I was sort of on the ground trying to figure it out as I went. So yeah, there was a lot between the two of us, a lot of conversation, but we were both clueless as to what we were, we were both very ignorant of Catholicism. So it was kind of the blind leading the blind in a way. But as for the nuns, so the main things and when I spoke earlier about the ideology underpinning the organization that kind of struck me as problematic. So here we are in a country that is one of the poorest nations in the world. There is a really significant presence of voodoo, and even the Catholicism that is practiced, and this is, I can't speak for the whole country, but the area that I worked in, even the Catholicism that was practiced was often kind of mixed with voodoo. And so it's a very highly charged spiritual environment.
That's a good way to put it.
And so I would go to church on Sunday at, our little evangelical church that we had the children. We had a pastor, and the pastor would say things to the children like, sometimes you're going to hear voices telling you to do things, and you should listen to those voices because that's God. And the maternal instinct in me toward these children was just like, no, no,
Yeah.
don't do that. You know,
Yeah.
you have to have some sort of canon, some sort of system through which you
Hmm.
can filter the voices you're hearing to determine whether those are from God or whether those are not, right? And
Yeah.
to tell a child in a really charged environment like that to listen to their voices in their head was really alarming to me.
Yeah.
But furthermore, you had things like, the nuns were, you saw them around town. Again, this was kind of a small town on the border. So you would see them around town. They had this simple habit, short sleeve and kind of a mid-length, it wasn't the full long habit because it's extremely hot there,
Yeah.
but just very simple. And they lived among the people. They shopped where the people shopped for
Hmm.
their groceries. They lived in a facility with the people that they served that, was similar to every other community home that you would
Hmm.
see. They took public transportation wherever they went. They truly were ingratiated with the people. The women in the organization that I worked for, they stuck out like a sore thumb
Hmm.
in the community. They wore, large diamond jewelry on their hands, and they drove car. They owned homes in 3 countries and had,
Hmm.
their apartment in the Dominican that they would go to on the weekends, and then they had their, that they lived a lifestyle that indicated to me that they were above, they were
Hmm.
different. And having gone to Oral Roberts, that wasn't a foreign idea to me. That was basically what we were taught was,
Hmm.
God wants you to be healthy and wealthy. And so if you go to these, poor, wretched souls to serve them, that's
Hmm.
fine. Serve them. That's great. That's a loving act to do. But they saw no conflict in living in one of the poorest nations in the world, but having 4-carat diamond rings on their hands that they're
Yeah.
flashing around the community.
Hmm.
So it was really that contrast that
Hmm.
drew my attention. That was like, there's something underpinning the ideology here that is not charitable.
Hmm.
And meanwhile, you have these nuns who are, I had been told by a priest that worked with them that did speak English that, they each had one change of clothes, they had one change of shoes,
Hmm.
and they truly lived among the poor. They were the poor. They didn't travel
Yeah.
home all the time. And so that really caught my attention.
Yeah.
That really was in a way that ultimately really changed my life because I started looking into, well, what would cause a person to sacrifice every comfort that they even had the opportunity to have, right?
Hmm.
They could have done what the people I worked with did, but they didn't. They sacrificed every comfort to become the poor. And that really led me down a path that ultimately I became a Catholic, and it really changed the trajectory of my whole life from there forward.
That's awesome. Yeah, I definitely like as a former Protestant, I also did some mission trips. And it was really interesting like after becoming Catholic, I'm like, gosh, like this makes so much sense. Like, devoting your life, maybe, remaining celibate so that you can solely focus on the mission and just like going there and, um it really establishing yourself as a long-term presence in a way where, that's just becomes your mission and yeah, it just the way you described it's really beautiful and definitely counterintuitive to like more of the evangelical approach of like kind of coming in and kind of being the savior instead of
Yeah,
um
yeah, yeah. And the organization I worked with, they did have a long-term presence there. They've been there for, at this point, like 20 years. So, I mean, that's in Protestant land, that's a pretty long-term presence. Um, But, and again, like, these women, it's, to me, a lot of it related back to the way I was raised, that my parents are wonderful, God-fearing, God-serving people. I don't disparage the way I was
Sure.
raised
Yeah.
at all. In fact, I, count myself very fortunate to have been raised in their home. That said, the reason I converted ultimately, I mean, you could look at all these other reasons, but, ultimately the reason I converted is I came to trust the Catholic Church more than I trusted myself. I came
Yeah.
to believe that this was the fulfillment of what Jesus said and what, this was the church that he founded. And so I didn't view my parents' faith or the faith of the people I worked with in Haiti as wrong necessarily, as it was incomplete.
That's a good way to put it.
Without the completion, the sacraments, and understanding that my church was not founded by, Joe Schmo in 2002. Like, this is the faith that goes all the way back to Jesus. And so I understood that the women were, they were serving God in the way that they had been taught one is to serve God. And in so doing, making a tremendous contribution to the world. But ultimately, it felt to me that there was something missing in the way that they were raising the children, and that I had to, even as a young woman, had this sense that these are children without parents, right? I mean, most of the children that we worked with either never knew their parents in the first place, or there was a large flood that had taken place, and a lot of the children had lost their parents in the flood. And so just instinctually, there was this part of me that said, we're teaching them that God is their father, but they also need a mother. These kids need a mother. And I can't be their mother forever, right? Like, I can be here for a while. The women who work here will be their mothers in the most, physical sense. But there were just all of these little pieces that felt empty to me. And ultimately, I think it was kind of my maternal instinct toward those kids that sort of drove me to say, I have to find what's missing here, because they deserve it. And my own children in the future deserve it. And so, it all started with those French Canadian nuns.
That's amazing. All right. So then what happened? Where did you go from there?
Okay. So my husband and I started dating. And so I left the organization that I was working with. And at that point, he had moved to Florida to go to graduate school. So he had kind of conned his way into a master's in theology program at Ave Maria University, which is a lovely Catholic school. When I say he conned his way in, he's very intelligent, but he had zero background in. He had a degree in theology from Oral Roberts, which is not saying it. It's basically a survey of religion degree. And so he sat down with this priest who eventually married us, who kind of just said, like, I really want to learn this. I really want to learn about Catholicism, and I don't know any other way to do it other than to, academically study. And so he was accepted to the master's program in theology. And so that was the same time that I was leaving the organization in Haiti. And so I moved to Ave Maria as well.
Okay.
And I worked for the university and lived in a house with a bunch of girls. And so it was there in Ave Maria that we went through RCIA together, and we came into the church together. We got engaged there, and planned our wedding, and then very shortly after we were brought into the church. Then we got married back where I grew up, which was fun because I had never been to the Catholic Church in the town I grew up in. So there was a lot of paperwork involved in being allowed to be married there. They're like, well, but you're not a Catholic. I promise I am now, but I have to prove it. So, at the time, My husband insisted that we join the church, that we go through RCIA before we get married. And in retrospect, I'm so grateful that we did
Yeah,
that. But
okay.
at the time, I really didn't like that idea. I did not want to
Let's
wait
get
another
married.
year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, let's get married now, and then we can have our marriage blessed. But I'm grateful in the long run that we did wait. But of course, at
Yeah.
the time, I was like, really, RCIA is long. I
Yeah.
don't want to wait that long. But we did. And coming into the church together was such a beautiful experience. Our sponsors, I mean, basically the whole town threw us a huge party. And, you were going to the Easter Vigil, and then there was a party that started at midnight. And then there was a party that started at 2. And like, we were just like partying the whole night. Because this community was just so, they just embraced us, and they were so supportive of our decision to join the church. And so, yeah, we joined the church, and then just a few months later, we got married. And then, then sort of our journey started, as a married couple from there. So my husband went to law school right after we got married. And then while he was in law school, and I was pregnant with our first child, he decided, we decided that he felt called to the diaconate.
Okay.
And so he started a 6-year diaconate training program. And it's different, a little bit different in every diocese, but here it's 6 years, and he says it's like joining the National Guard. It's a weekend every month for 6 years.
Okay.
And so he did that and was just ordained a couple of years ago. And so, we couldn't be happier. I mean, a friend of mine once said, the proof is in the pudding. You don't necessarily have to make arguments as to, the truth of your faith, or, look at the people, look at the fruits, right?
Mm-hmm.
I look back at people that I grew up with and that I went to ORU with, and when the rubber hit the road for them in adulthood, a lot of them left the faith. And honestly, I think had I not found Catholicism, I may have done that as well.
Yeah.
Because you hit a point where you're asking questions that there aren't any answers to. And those hard questions, in my view, the answer only comes from the church and from the philosophy that guides the church. So certainly people of goodwill can interpret certain things in different ways, political issues or social issues. But I remember spending those last couple of years that I was a Protestant really feeling I had a lot of questions about politics and social issues and family issues and a lot of things that I didn't feel like there were any answers to. And I had this unsettling feeling of kind of like, is this it? Do I just have questions forever? And the comfort for me of being able to now be in a place where, first of all, I think there are answers to all the questions, and they are found in the philosophy and the tradition and the history and the theology of the church. But even more than that, getting to a place where, as I said earlier, I trust the church more than I trust myself. So if I have a question that I don't feel like I can find an answer for, I'm okay with not having an answer to every question.
Yeah.
And I wasn't that way when I was younger, I think because Protestantism really teaches you that you are the arbiter of truth. And so that's a lot of pressure. Right?
Yeah.
That's an awful lot of pressure on a person to say, well, you have to figure out the answer to every question.
Right.
Where now I'm okay saying certain things are a mystery, or sort of just like, not my circus, not my monkeys. I don't have to know every answer.
Yeah, and that makes sense, right? Like, like as a wife and as a mother, you don't have time always to go and figure out the deep theological truth of the matter. You can just be like a holy person living out your everyday life. And focus more on, what your vocation that God has called you to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always think of the, Mother Teresa, and I'm gonna botch the quote, but she said something along the lines of, "I don't wash a dish because I love the dish. I wash it because I love the next person who's going to use it." And I think that's such an apt description of motherhood. You're just
think about that.
You're doing a lot of things every day. I love Downton Abbey. I mean, who doesn't? And I just recently watched the new movie, and I got so irritated at this one point where one of the girls says that, she's gone back to writing after having a child, maybe two children. She's gone back to writing and running this magazine. And her mother says, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you do something to use your brain."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, come on now. I mean, motherhood, you're engaging your brain all day long.
Yeah.
Let's not act like this is some sort of like mindless activity.
Sure.
If you're doing it right, that is, I mean, maybe it's mindless if you just stick your, kid in front of YouTube all day. But I mean, if you're trying to engage, but there is a comfort for me in recognizing my station in life right now that God has given me is to do a lot of small tasks every day for the people that I love.
Yeah.
And I don't have a lot of extra brain space for contemplation of deep theological concepts.
Yeah.
But that's okay. The church shows us, the simplest person to the most brilliant king can equally serve God in the church. So I don't feel this sense of pressure and responsibility like I used to, that I have to figure everything out. I just sort of have the comfort of knowing the sacraments are here and the church will guide me. And that doesn't mean that I don't like using my brain. It means that I actually trust the church.
Yeah. And I think it sounds like you're really like living out your life in a sacramental way that like maybe you couldn't as an evangelical. Like, I think there's something where like, like with the sacraments, you recognize that like through the incarnation, like everything has been made holy. So like, your role as a mother and as a wife, like it's holy in a way that it wouldn't be otherwise, like it is. It's just like, it is again, like a beautiful vocation that you're living out every single day.
Yeah. And it's such a gift. I think the church gives us such a gift in the understanding that whatever your vocation is, it is sanctified if you want it to be.
Yeah.
I think a lot of my friends and relatives who are Protestant, they've really struggled with the idea of giving up career, or just their life, even in the years of small children, their life taking on a different role, even for a season.
Yeah.
And, I work, I have a job, I work from home, but, my vocation, my job, my real job is being a wife and a mother. And there was certainly a time in my past where I would have struggled in the same way that I've seen a lot of my Protestant friends and relatives struggle, because there isn't really that teaching, that understanding in evangelicalism that, the greatest vocation, that whatever vocation God calls you to, it's your choice whether you do that as an act of service to God, and whether you can therefore find the fulfillment and the meaning in it, or whether you view it as, anyone could do this. Anyone could change a diaper. Anyone could wash a dish.
Yeah.
Well, sure they could. I mean, most people could. My 8-year-old can wash a dish and change a diaper. But I am the only one who has been given that task for my particular children in this particular moment, in a way that I can bring holiness into it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a very freeing experience for me too, to be able to sort of walk away from the kind of feminist ideology that would, that I was really into in college, that would tell me that my meaning came from a paycheck
Hmm.
or from, the letters after my name, and
Yeah.
rather, to recognize the vocation that I feel like working at an orphanage was kind of a dead giveaway that I was really called to motherhood, and I just
Hmm.
didn't totally
That's
understand it
interesting.
yet. So yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that like, being working in the orphanage, you felt like something was missing. Like what would you say was the thing that was missing that you found through becoming a Catholic?
Well, I think one of the biggest things was a mother, teaching these children, because I tried to be as sensitive as I could to the fact that I couldn't, my life experience was almost nothing like the children that I was working with every day. And I tried to be sensitive to the differences as much as I could. At the time when I was working there, most of the children were quite small. They were mostly like under 10. So we weren't yet at the stage of teenagers and all of the things that go along with that. And I just saw in these children that, they were really being taught that I know that your father and mother have died or have abandoned you, but you have a father in heaven.
Hmm.
And they latched onto that. These were small children. And so they really latched onto, you know, they had a physical presence of a caretaker, but
Hmm.
they knew that these women that they were working with that were, serving as their mothers at the time, they knew that those women may or may not be able to be with them every step of their life. And so they were really heavily taught, rely on your father in heaven.
Hmm.
But as a woman, I'm sitting there, I'm with these small children, and I'm thinking they need a mama.
Hmm.
They need somebody to draw them into their chest and hold them and comfort them and nurture them. And the sort of version of God that they were being taught in this particular environment was, um, I wouldn't say it was a bad depiction of God, but it
Sure.
was it was a very it was very masculine, I guess,
Hmm.
sort of depiction of God as leader and God as savior and God as kind of rule maker in a way. And I just saw this desperate need for motherhood, and it made no sense to me that they would be taught about the family of God, but the family didn't have a mother.
Hmm.
So that really was something that I wanted for them. And I really was not even at the place myself where I had a strong relationship with Mary. I don't really feel like that was something that kicked in for me until after I started
Yeah.
receiving the sacraments regularly. I didn't, have that experience at that point, but I recognized it as something that was necessary, and particularly necessary for children who didn't have a physical mother or father.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. And then I really think the other thing was they were being taught a version of faith, which is similar to the version of faith that I was taught at ORU, which is very, very dependent upon one's emotions.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah.
And, I had the good fortune that even when I was in a faith sort of headspace where everything was determined by emotions, I was fortunate to have um, these lovely beings God gives us called parents who would sort of take my emotional idea and then say, okay, let's think about this a little bit. Let's,
Hmm.
play it down
Yeah.
the line a little bit. What would that decision look like if, you know, 5 years from now or whatever the case may be? Well, these kids didn't have that. And so to me, it was very dangerous and very irresponsible, I thought, to teach them to trust their emotions so much. The same as I mentioned earlier about listening to the voices. They
Yeah.
needed a philosophical underpinning. They needed a catechism
Hmm.
to say, yes, you feel X, but it is directly contradictory to the teaching of the church. So we can definitively say that that is not what God is saying to you.
Hmm.
We can
Yeah.
definitively determine, we don't have to debate it. We can say, if God's telling you to do X and it's in contradiction to the church, we know that that is not God that's talking to you.
Yeah.
So they
We all need
needed something
that.
to be able to bounce their emotional ideas off of and see if they, and this balance of faith and reason, they needed
Hmm.
to be able to see the reason side. And particularly, again, as children who, as they were growing up and becoming adults, may or may not have a physical person to bounce those things off of. Even more so, those children needed to have a canonical understanding of what their faith taught, so that it wasn't just well, I had this emotion, and so therefore this is God. I mean, those are the ingredients for really bad theology,
Yeah.
and ultimately really damaging to the human person. You know, imagine, I mean, these, again, orphan children, they have this relationship with God. If they don't have a framework to bounce ideas off of, and therefore that relationship with God becomes damaged, now what? They
Hmm.
have nowhere to go, right?
Yeah.
So they really needed that, and they were not being taught that at all. Their faith was so emotional. And so I say, when I kind of tell the story over the years, I say I recognize that the family of God needed a mother, and I recognized that the Church of God needed a hierarchy,
Hmm.
because being led by everyone's emotions didn't make any sense. And as a person who studied business and has worked in nonprofit organizations, I mean, we start being led by our emotions, things just don't work out.
Yeah.
So
That's awesome. I guess so. You've kind of certainly touched on this. What would you say some of the graces are that you've experienced as a Catholic?
yeah, I think that when my conversion took place, I was not one of these people who cried when I first received the Eucharist. I didn't have a big like emotional experience at first.
Sure.
And I think a lot of that was me being kind of guarded against emotional expressions of faith, because I was, I'd recognized that that was a problem in my history. So it wasn't for me until several months into being a Catholic and receiving the Eucharist at least once every week and going to confession as regularly as I could, that I started to recognize this real relaxation in
Hmm.
myself. I've always been pretty high strung, and I would tend to get angry easily, to get emotional easily, to sort of as I mentioned earlier, kind of that striving, like I have to find the answer. It's up to me. I have to figure it out. And I really felt in myself, probably within a year of my conversion, just this relaxation and recognition that God, there have been billions of people on the planet. God put them all here for a particular reason. And I am not smarter than any of them. I am not, I don't have to figure it all out. The church gives us millennia of inherited wisdom, and it's okay for me to recognize the areas in which I am strong and be able to grow where I'm planted, and not try to grow all over the place.
Hmm.
So I was able to kind of just relax And I think a lot of that also has to do with the fact that I converted at the same time that I got married. And so, in my college years, when I was reading a lot of feminist literature and things along those lines, I fully rejected this idea um, of I don't like to use the word submission because it sounds like it's
Yeah.
involuntary, but this idea that my husband was the head of the household and that
Uh-huh.
I was not. I fully rejected that. But then when I actually got married and was a Catholic wife, neither one
Yep.
of which I was, just a few months before, I felt myself being able to trust my husband in a way that I don't think my pride would have allowed me to trust someone just months before.
Hmm.
So I think that sort of humility, that softening of my pride, allowed me to be able to recognize. I remember, and I shouldn't tell this story on myself, but I remember just a few months into being married, I remember having this sort of realization one day. I was literally laying in bed, woke up in the morning, and kind of just had this realization: my husband is smarter than I am. And this is not to say that husbands are smarter than wives across the board, not at
Uh-huh.
all. But in my particular circumstance, I am good at a good many
Don't
things.
tell him you said that, though.
Don't tell him. I excel at a good many things, and I'm very confident and comfortable in those areas. But when it comes to raw intellect, I cannot compete with my husband. He's very intelligent. And I remember having that realization and then shocking myself by having the next realization, which was, that's okay.
Huh.
Like, I don't have to be everything to everyone. I don't have to try to be the best in every area. I can simply rest in the knowledge that I am in the vocation that God has called me to.
Yeah.
And I am going to do my best. And if that means that I end up running a nonprofit organization, or if that means I am a stay-at-home mom for 40 years,
Yeah.
so be it. I don't have an attachment to either one of those. And I really think that the sacraments gave me that, because I was very attached to, my idea of myself as an independent career woman who was going to make it on her own. And in a lot of ways, I've been very fortunate that, as I mentioned, I continue to work now, and I've been very fortunate in my work life to be successful, but in no way does that define me.
Yeah.
And in those years before I was partaking of the sacraments regularly, those things defined me, and I was very attached in I think a prideful and not very healthy way to what those things said about me.
That's really interesting. That's a really great answer. Well, I guess I have kind of one last question for you. What would you say to someone else who asked you, like, why should I be Catholic?
Yeah, well, I mean, the really short answer is because it's true.
You're the second person in a row that has answered that. That's so funny.
Because this is the truth. I mean, ultimately, so, on that side of things, we're living in a culture where words are redefined every single day. I mean, we don't know what life is. We don't know what a woman is. We don't know what truth is. We don't know, all of these areas where we're redefining words that have had the same definition since the dawn of time. And suddenly we're so smart now that we're changing those definitions. And certainly truth is one of those words. I don't believe in my truth or your truth. I mean, certainly you and I have different experiences, and we can, as people of goodwill, interpret situations a little differently, as I mentioned earlier. But ultimately, there is a truth, and that truth is found in Jesus Christ and in the church that he set up and that he gave us. So ultimately, because it's true. But if I want to go to a sort of other hand, the truth sets you free. And in so many ways, I was not an unhappy person as an evangelical, but the truth has set me free in so
Hmm.
many ways. And I see so much striving and so much um, confusion and tension and friction amongst our brothers and sisters who are Protestant. And I just have this freedom as a Catholic to every morning lay myself down and say, the Lord's will be done. That doesn't mean that every day is going to be easy. It doesn't mean that there aren't going to be struggles and tensions and all of those things. But at the end of the day, I have this rock solid, historically based, fact based core that I can always fall back on. And so, in the same way that I would say to someone, a lot of people look at marriage and they see maybe their parents had an adversarial relationship and they kind of see these two people as competing with one another.
Hmm.
And when I look at marriage and the graces that I've received through marriage, I think why wouldn't anybody want? Everyone would want to have a relationship where you can truly rely on this person to such a degree that even if you have a disagreement, you can trust that that person is making a decision for your best good or you for his best good. You have
Mm-hmm.
that core relationship. And that's a lot of the way that I feel about my faith as well, that I'm able to
Hmm.
rest and relax in knowing that this thing is unchangeable. And
Yeah.
so I would want that for anyone. I want them to be able to be free and be happy. And that's found in the church. And I don't believe that it can truly be found anywhere else.
That's awesome. Well, Amy, thank you so much for sharing your story. Are there any last words before we kind of wrap up the interview?
No, I appreciate you chatting with me and hope that uh, maybe my story can offer some encouragement to someone else. We certainly had a bit of family adversity. Some people weren't real thrilled about our decisions to join the church, but it's been the best decision of my life, and I wouldn't change it for anything.
That's awesome. Well, I'm sure that your story will encourage others. It's definitely been encouraging for me to hear. So, yeah, thank you so much for sharing.
All right, thank you.